Hi, my name is Twanna Hines, and I'm an artist and entrepreneur. What's more, I love film. I'm so excited to be doing this. Touchstone, the new intimacy. Super informal, single take, little clip for you to have an opportunity to listen in to me wax about something related to sexual health and film. And this is part of Sundance's Beyond Film programming with mama.film. Could be excited to be part of presenting this. So I'll kick this off by talking about one of my favorite films, Cinema Paradiso. I don't know if you've seen this film. It's like from the late 80s. It's Italian, and there's this little kid, and he's trying to escape all of the monstrosities of war. It's like, I think it's Sicily, it's during the war and things like that. So he goes into the movie theater. So he's in the movie theater, he's at the cinema, hence Cinema Paradiso, and he's watching all of these clips. And they have to cut all of the clips off when there's any kissing. So you can't show intimacy, that kind of like physical intimacy on the screen. And so I won't tell you what happens because I don't want to spoil it for you in case you haven't seen it, because you really should watch this film. But here's the thing that's interesting. We obviously are not at this moment in a war-torn country such as Sicily was during this film, but we are being ravaged by something else, a virus, COVID-19. And because of COVID-19, much like in that film, we're not getting the kisses that we need right now. The just supportive, like touching someone on the arm when they're going through something very difficult or challenging or something else. All of these, of course, consensual. And so it's been interesting to just kind of watch how we're all living in this moment, so many of us. In the US in particular, we've got about 37, almost 38 million people who live alone. We're marrying later as a country. Most Americans are marrying at a much later age than they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. They're divorcing more, so they're staying married a shorter amount of time, and we're living longer. So the result is we're spending more of our lives single, and a lot of that living on our own. And so with COVID, what we're seeing is a lot of people simply are not being touched at all by another living being, which is so unhealthy in so many ways. When you do watch these films, I want you to look at the ways in which people are touching each other or not touching each other. Because when we talk about this idea of intimacy, right? They say intimacy is the new porn, is the phrase that's out there, right? It's this idea that, like, what could possibly be more revealing than seeing someone's soul, right? It's not just flesh and bone. It's actually seeing the way in which this person thinks, behaves, believes, wants to be seen in the world, what they cherish, what they hold dear, all of these things. And so as you start watching these films at Sundance this year, I want you to really kind of look at how are you seeing intimacy play out on screen. For this one clip, I want to talk about taboos. Taboos. Things that we don't see on screen. So one of the things that I want us to be thinking about as you're watching these films on Sundance, right? Because film has this fantastic way of bringing us worlds that we haven't imagined or that we can't envision or that we can't see. It like opens up a world of possibilities. I often say, like, if we can actually dream of a better world, if we can dream of it, if we can see it, if we can create it on screen, on all the places where art is made, we can build that, we can make it happen. So I love film for all of those wonderful ways. What I want us to be thinking about for this particular clip are the kinds of intimacy that we don't see on film so much. So I want us to be thinking about this in a couple different ways. One, race and ethnicity. So one of the things that we think about when we're watching a film and we're seeing couples, like we're being told, right, like who's an appropriate partner for one person or another person, right? And so when we start thinking about whether or not we see Black couples, for example, on screen, Latino couples, BIPOC, just all different kinds of couples. It's like when we're looking at the films for this year, definitely pay attention to the kinds of couples that are, or thruples even. I'm open to everything. Everybody's open to do what they want. No judgments here. Partners, the types of partners that we see, sexual and otherwise, on film. Because here's what happens, right? When we're talking about like interracial or interethnic kind of couples, we don't see that represented as much. And so what that has to do with intimacy too, it's like intimacy, we can think of it in terms of proximity. right? Like if we say we know something intimately, I know this about something intimately, we mean we know it very well. We have this close proximity and understanding of it. And so when we think about like race and ethnicity in the United States and how close proximity different ethnic groups are, not just geographically, right, but actually that like intimacy, intellectual, emotional, physical being close to holding someone else as our compatriot in arms in this planet that we all share together. So look to see what kind of couples you see when it comes to race and ethnicity. See, aha, race and ethnicity. But whether or not you see different ethnic groups and racial groups actually depicted. Also look at class, right? Like when we talk about like how we understand each other and relate to each other, are we seeing like the fact that 1 in 4, I think, American children live in poverty in this country, and with COVID, things are getting pretty difficult for a lot of families and a lot of individuals, just generally speaking. So I also see, like, are we seeing that up close and personal in the films that we watch, right? Think of sexuality. How often do we see couples that are LGBTQ represented on film? And so as we look at the kinds of intimacy that we see displayed, not just what physical activities are happening, right? Like, are people being grabbed consensually and touched and sucked and licked and kissed and all of the kinds of things when we think of intimacy typically, but also be thinking about the actual bodies that we see represented. So I want to talk a little bit about sex tech. You might be thinking like, what is that? Or you probably already know. Either way, I'll talk about it a little bit more. So these are the kinds of things in which technology enhances the sexual or intimate experience. This usually includes things like virtual reality, artificial intelligence. I always want to say artificial insemination when I see AI because that's so much of my world, right? Like artificial intelligence, sex robots, that type of stuff, like all of these kinds of things. Teledildonics, and so like using remote controlled, battery operated, and Wi-Fi enabled kind of toys that you can use with your partner. All of these ways in which you can be intimate by bringing technology in as part of the equation. And so the kinds of things we want to talk about when we're thinking about like virtual reality, all kinds of ethical conversations come up when we're talking about sex. What does consent look like in a virtual reality world? Like, what's VR consent look like? Can you criminalize sexual assault, right? Like, sexual assault happens in VR. And so, like, should that be criminalized? We criminalize all kinds of virtual and digital and technological sexual activities. And so, what does that look like when we talk about VR, right? And then ditto for AI, a lot of ethical and tech considerations when it comes to like robot sex, all of these kinds of things. And then the last one of like teledildonics is also thinking more about with all of these things too. You're still putting yourself out there and being intimate in a very virtual way that can be hacked. And so like all of these kinds of like some funny, some fun, some interesting, some very probing kinds of questions and thoughts that we should have in our minds when we start thinking about what it means to have like a sex tech world and what does that look like on film, especially as we think of like living in COVID when a lot of the traditional like person to person kind of intimacy that often involved touch isn't quite like it used to be beforehand. So these are the kinds of things that I want you to be thinking about as we go into Sundance. Look and see what kinds of ethical conversations and ethical considerations we're seeing on films. As we think about intimacy, often we think of physical touch. So in this new world where we're living in COVID, where that's no longer possible, so many of us haven't been hugged or just, that supportive, like when someone puts their hand on your shoulder or your arm or your back, of just like feeling like someone's there with you. We haven't had that at the same level and the same rate that we would if we were not living under COVID-19. I'm going to talk about intimacy, the new intimacy, the kinds of intimacy that we have to have with people when we cannot touch them. So this is evergreen advice. Y'all are getting this for free. Here's some advice that I want to share with you about how can you be intimate with people when you cannot touch them. So here's a couple tips for you, right? 1, sight. Too often when we think about the senses and connecting with the world around us, we think of that as touch, right? If I say connect with your partner, sometimes we think of physically touching them. We don't take time to physically look at things, right? When's the last time you just stopped without saying a damn thing, looked at your partner and just told them, you're really beautiful? And then go even deeper and say specifically, what do you like about them? What is the shape of their lips, right? We all have imperfections in our face, in our body, whatever. Like, what are the kinds of things that you've noticed about them? And what do you love about it, right? Just take time to actually look at your partner. If you've ever been in one of those situations when someone didn't see you, not just physically looking at you, but you just feel like they don't even know who I am. I feel like I'm not even seen, right? I feel invisible. If you have that feeling, it's not just physically that they're not looking at you, it's that they don't know you. So that first level is just first look at folks, right? It seems simple enough, but people just don't do it. 2, vulnerability. If you want to connect with other people, you have to be vulnerable. Talk about your fears. It seems like the simplest thing in the world, and we don't do it, right? We talk about what makes us angry. We talk about why we're frustrated. We talk about all of these things, but we don't swipe that away and get to the root and actually talk about what is that fear? What's that? What are we afraid of? What's that hurt? What's that pain? What's driving why we're doing the things that we're doing? So make sure you keep looking at your partner a little bit deeper than usual. Make sure you're vulnerable with your partner. The other thing we don't do is stop to actually taste. Think of one of your favorite partners. Do you remember what they taste like, right? This is a good time to kind of exercise those skills and memories and like eat your favorite foods and put other things in your mouth and remember what it actually tastes like. Savor it, right? So whatever you put in your mouth next, or if you're eating right now, actually stop and really think about what it tastes like. These are fun, zippy things, right? Like, we need this. We need joy in our lives. This is the kinds of shit that we need. And also, yeah, when you're watching these movies, look and see, like, how are they displaying no-touch intimacy in it? How are they able to convey that? Because these actors are humans, and they're having to do that. Some of them are doing, there's intimacies, coordinators, there's all kinds of ways in which we navigate what happens and doesn't happen, like on set, right? But also take time to think of how are they navigating no-touch intimacy. So enjoy the festival.